Welcome to another episode of The Unseen Paranormal, where some of the scariest things are unseen. I'm your host, Eric Freeman. Hey everybody, welcome back to the show. Today we welcome back my buddy and the unofficial co-host of The Unseen Paranormal, Alan Sircy. Alan is the author of the Southern Ghost Story series of books, which include Murfreesboro, Spirits of Stones River, Ghosts of Gallatin, Franklin, Tennessee, and his newest book in the series that we're going to talk about today, Southern Ghost Stories Downtown Nashville. He's also the creator of the Ghost Map app and the Tennessee Hauntings Facebook group. You can find Alan's books on Amazon, Kindle, and wherever fine books are sold. For more information, check out southernghoststories.com or join us over on the Tennessee Hauntings Facebook group. Hey, Alan, welcome back to the show.
Hey, man, it's good to be back, but honestly, as much as I'm on here, I feel like I've never left.
Right. Like I said, you're an official co-host, so... And you like to call yourself the Tom Hanks of the Unseen Paranormal.
I am the Tom Hanks of the Unseen Paranormal.
Everybody can go back and listen to the past episodes that you've been on, and we talked about a bunch of your books. But today is Downtown Nashville. I was excited about this book. I have been waiting on you to get it done so I would have somebody talk about Nashville, because I really haven't dove into Nashville.
Yeah, in Nashville, God, there's just so much history. I think I told you, like I've got a back burner. I collect stories and just. Once I get in one project done, I'll go back to that back burner and just turn up the heat and go full throttle. Well, Nashville, like, I guess it was back in January, December, I started kind of putting the book together and I realized, like, man, I've got almost 600 pages here for Nashville. So I had to really just kind of back off and restructure it. Instead of just going with one big Nashville book, I decided to break it up and just dive into downtown first and then branch off into north, south, east, and west. So downtown is where I'm at right now.
Yeah, there's lots of interesting stories with the honky tonks and with the Ryman being downtown and Printer's Alley and all those historical places. So I could imagine we're just doing a downtown Nashville book.
Yeah, and it's nuts. Like, and when I thought I was done, I was just getting started. I was talking to a guy and he's like, yeah, well, you didn't hear about the LNC Tower, did you? And I was like, no, I mean, growing up in Nashville, the LNC Tower was the tallest building in Nashville for God, I guess up until maybe 10 years ago. And as a kid, I was always fascinated with it, you know, the big LNC on the side. And I guess before my time, back in the 50s and 60s and 70s, the lights changed colors to correspond with the weather. It helped with the forecast and alert people what the weather's going to do, because there's really I guess TV was in its infancy and radio was out there, but if you just want to look up and see what the weather's going to be, you could look at the LNC Tower. But back in the 90s, there was a lady from Kentucky. She recently got divorced and she went to the LNC Tower. And of course, they used to have like this place you can go out there and look around and see everything. Well, she would go up there and she went up there, I think, on a Thursday. And she went up there and looked around and she made small talk with a lady who worked in the building. And then she left. She came back the next day and asked if she'd go back out there again. And of course, they thought it was strange, but it's conflicting. Some say she jumped, some say she climbed over the ledge and then stumbled because she was trying to climb back over. Either way, the lady, she died. She fell, God, all the way from the top of the LNC Tower to the ground there. And I was talking to a security guard, and the story is that they've seen a woman floating through the building. The elevator will it'll start at the ground floor, go to the 30th, and just open, like it's waiting for someone to be called. The security guard was telling me that it's just, they've had people come out and run diagnostics on it and check it out because it's just really weird. They can't figure out. Each time they check it out, the machine shows it's running just fine. But he told me it's kind of like the talk in the building is the elevator goes to the 30th floor because it never picked up the passenger, and it's just they're waiting for her to come back.
Wow. And for anybody that doesn't know, LNC stands for Life and Casualty because it was built by an insurance company, right? Yeah.
It's also LNC also founded the Grand Ole Opry and Opryland, and that's a whole nother book I did last year.
But yeah, that's crazy because you hear a lot about elevators in buildings, the haunted buildings for some reason. I don't know if it's just something that they can manipulate easily but yeah, there's lots of stories about elevators out there. The Sircy Hotel is a famous one where the elevator has issues. But the fact that they've checked out the elevator and there's nothing mechanically or electronically wrong with it, but it still does this all the time. That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
But there's lots of other history downtown, like the honky tonks. I know from just growing up around Nashville that Tootsie's Orchid Lounge is notoriously haunted.
Yeah, and like Broadway, that whole stretch there, I mean, to go back really before everything, when Nashville was settled, it was settled by a bunch of guys who came from North Carolina. James Robertson, Rachel Donaldson's father, John Donaldson. Well, when they established Fort Nashboro, I mean, if you're familiar with Nashville, they have this little miniature replica down there by the river. Fort Nashboro was actually up by Church Street, and it was like several city blocks long. It was a very big fort, and it had stockades and had little houses built into it. It was to keep the settlers safe from Indian attacks. Well, it was back in the 1780s, I believe it was. Well, it's called the Battle of the Bluffs. The Indians, they scalped settlers. They would behead them. They were invading their hunting grounds. So one day they kept trying to bait them to come out and fight. And eventually these Indians taking pot shots at the fort, and a handful of, I mean, it's a dozen or so settlers just ran off on horseback and started chasing them south down to Broadway, down where all the honky tonks is, where I guess it's Jason Aldean's, and just this is a row of honky tonks on Broadway. They got ambushed. All these, I think 200 or 300 Indians were laying in wait there in the brush and just ambushed them. So they're fighting. James Robertson's wife, Charlotte, noticed what was going on, and she saw her son was being attacked. She saw her husband being attacked. Well, she consulted with somebody else there, and they released the hunting dogs. So when the hunting dogs came running, some of the Indians broke away, started chasing the horses because they wanted horses for their own personal use. Some Indians kept fighting. When the dogs finally made their way down to Broadway, they started fighting the Indians, started biting them, and the Indians, they used all their bullets by the end. They're fighting their dogs with their bare hands in some cases. So the settlers had enough time to break away and run back to the fort. It was a mess. I think roughly half a dozen people got killed. It all happened right there where all those honky tonks are on Broadway. And it's kind of lost time.
Yeah, and Nashville's kind of going through this thing where I don't know if they've ever really embraced the history of downtown Nashville, especially because we've had, especially in the past 20 years, so many skyscrapers built, which tearing down historic buildings and stuff. But at least Broadway is still kind of somewhat protected because of all the tourists.
Yeah, and you mentioned Tootsie's earlier. There's stories of them seeing Hank Williams. The weirdest story I encountered about Tootsie's, I was talking to a security guard, and he was telling me that during the pandemic, the mayor of Nashville shut everything downtown down, and they wouldn't let them open. So the security guard, he would stay in the bar to protect the liquor, protect the building. And he said that on the night or the day Joe Diffie died, he was there. And of course, Joe Diffie, he shot the video for Probably Upside the Jukebox, If I Die, at Tootsie's. He also was a regular performer there. He performed there before he made it big, and after he made it, he still come back and play. Well, the security guard would say that on the day he died, they would crank the thermostat to 90, like the whole building was like 30 or 40 degrees. Like the building, he said it was like the building was in mourning. He could not get the building warm. And he said the very next day, without any issue, it just went back to normal.
Wow. And there's other spirits around that area too, because you got the Ryman right behind Tootsie's, and the performers used to go into Tootsie's, right?
Yeah, they would always, after the Opry was over, they'd go out that little alley right there back into Tootsie's, and Hattie Best, Miss Tootsie, she would have their records playing, make them feel like they were, a big deal. Even if somebody's kind of starting out, she made sure she played their records or have somebody singing their songs. So they're like, oh wow, I'm a star, and they if they feel welcome there, they keep coming back. So, but like Willie Nelson, Chris Christopherson, they actually stayed at Tootsie's where they really made it big. The story is Willie Nelson sold Crazy, the song he had written, to Patsy Cline's wife. Patsy Cline's husband, there in a booth at Tootsie's before he really made it big.
Wow. So much history, especially with country music and music in general. The Ryman is also notoriously haunted by insane. People see many, what they think is famous performers there.
Yeah, they say that it's the ghost of Thomas Ryman. They say that Minnie Pearl. They say that one of the old managers, she haunts there. A Confederate soldier. I was talking to a guy not too long ago, was telling me that there was a janitor went into the Johnny Cash dressing room to clean, and when he walked out, the door just closed and locked itself. And he said, there's just no way it's possible. It has to be locked from the inside. So any door could possibly close by itself, but there's no way for it to lock. So that really threw him off. There's so many stories with the Ryman. I met a guy a while back who was telling me that his father worked there. He was in upper management or something, and he was there spending the day with his manager or with his father. And they were in the office just talking, piddling, doing whatever they're doing. And all of a sudden they heard this just boom, this huge, loud, horrible sound. And it sounded like what he said, the roof had just collapsed and fell in. So they're just running as fast as they can in the auditorium. They get there and there's just nothing. And they say things like that are a common occurrence. They hear weird noises, hear a lady laughing. Minnie Pearl, like it's documented before the Grand Ole Opry left the Ryman and went to the new Opry House over off Bradley Parkway. She was telling reporters she came by to say goodbye to the spooks and shadows. Those are her exact words. So it's just kind of weird that even back then in the 70s, the performers were acknowledging it.
Yeah. Yeah. And that building is iconic, and it's of course, a landmark in Nashville. And most people have heard of the Ryman Auditorium because, like you said, it was the home of the Grand Ole Opry before it moved out to what I like to call Shopperland now.
Yeah.
The Opryland Hotel and the Opry Mills Mall, where they tore down. For people not from Nashville, they actually tore down Opryland Park, theme park, which you wrote a book about the Opryland area, and built a fucking shopping mall. And the head of Gaylord said that was his biggest regret, was tearing down the theme park.
A little backstory on that. The CEO, he walked away, he retired, and the new guy who came in, he wanted to turn Opryland into like Downtown Disney or the Strip in Las Vegas. He wanted to combine rides and attractions. And when they got the nuts and bolts, they found it was easier to just charge rent to a tenant in the mall than have to pay for maintenance on rides and have a park that sat empty for from like December until April. So you have a year-long attraction like a mall, you're just collecting revenue from rent and you make more money that way. So yeah, it came down to money when they closed Opryland.
Yeah, and Opryland, growing up, I remember it really well, going there. And the special thing about Opryland, not to get off the subject of downtown Nashville, but the special thing about Opryland was you could get kind of up close and personal with the country stars.
Mm-hmm. Roy Acuff had a house there.
Yeah. Yeah, I think I remember as a kid seeing Minnie Pearl just walking through the park talking to people. Like, you know. And so, but I guess Broadway's kind of replaced that, because you get all these country stars that have their own honky tonks down there now. That's kind of the thing with Broadway at this point.
Yeah, well, the thing about like Old Red, Blake Shelton's, his club or bar, honky tonk, whatever it is, where that sits, it was the home of like one of the earliest settlers, Timothy DeMumbrian. And they say weird things happen in that building. The associates there kind of jokingly named the ghost Timothy. They'll move things around. They hear noises, stuff like that. It's just kind of neat that right there where a big honky tonk is, it was the home of like the DeMumbrian Parkway, or was it DeMumbrian? Well, I call it DeMumbrian. It's downtown. It's one of the roads no one knows how to pronounce, but it's because of a settler, Timothy DeMumbrian. He's a fur trader. Yeah,
it's everybody likes to, people out of town call it Demon Bruin, because that's kind of how it's spelled. But and then over off of DeMumbrian, you have Cummins Stations. You got the back of Union Station. Union Station has a pretty famous haunting as well. Yeah, I didn't really go into that one because I've already covered that in the hotel book I did. But yeah, they say the was room 711, Abigail. Weird things happen in there. Cleaning crews. They always have they hear noises. TVs turn themselves off and on. They say there's a little boy they see running around down there in the lobby who plays tricks on the associates. Yeah, but that's in my book, Southern Ghost Stories, Haunted Hotels. What are some of the other places that you wouldn't think was haunted down there? Because they built a big Music City Center. You got Bridgestone Arena and all these newer buildings. One of the coolest for me was the arcade. Because when I was a kid, I go down there and eat pizza sometimes. And, you know, it's a really old building, but it's not really historical. It was built like in the 1910s, 1920s, whatever it was. But they say that there's a spirit of an old maintenance man. He was an African-American gentleman. He's a fairly old guy. He worked there for years, and everybody knew him. So they say once he passed away, they started smelling cigars upstairs on the second floor where he always took his breaks. He'd go up there to smoke. So now even though he's gone, they go up there and still smell the cigarette smoke. But the neatest story, I think, there's a beauty shop on the second floor, and they say they've seen a lady in white walking around there. And I started digging around, found out the story. There was a lady named Hula who owned a beauty shop, and she died in a traffic accident. And they say that maybe she's up there. People have seen her up there across the street from the windows. People have seen a lady in there. Lady who runs the shop up there, she's actually got in trouble with management. They've confronted her and asked her, hey, is somebody staying in your shop at night? And she's like, no. Like, well, we see people in there.
So that's just another really cool story, the arcade. And if you've been in the arcade, it's like an alley, but they've made it into a shopping center. It's really strange how it's set up. It's really cool.
Yeah, they got a bunch of like art galleries and that type stuff. And it's kind of like a glass, the ceiling is glass over the alleyway is kind of what it looks like.
Yeah, they wanted it so you can come shopping because I think they were trying to keep, as Nashville grew, he wanted their shopping on the public square. But after all the fires and stuff at the square, they started coming down to Broadway and 2nd Avenue. And they were trying to keep things up there on that northern end of town. And it flourished for many, many years. And it's still in operation today. But most of it's restaurants and small little shops. And the upstairs is now just offices. But still here in Nashville, I think it's something worth checking out if you're in town.
Yeah, one of my favorite places, too, over in that area is Printer's Alley, which luckily the tourists haven't really discovered it too much yet. I love to go down there, Bourbon Street Blues and Boogie Bar and hang out. But there's a lot of history in Printer's Alley as well.
Yeah, and it goes all the way back to Andrew Jackson. The story is his friend owned a livery stable right there in the alley, and he would board his horses because he practiced law just around the corner. And as the years have grown and developed, it kind of became, during Prohibition, there's a lot of speakeasies and bars, and the laws are real funny in Nashville up until the 60s or 70s. You could bring your own alcohol to the bars, but they couldn't sell it to you, and they just charge you to kind of mix it for you. Well, there's a guy named Skull. He owns Skull's Rainbow Room, and they say they see him walking around. Even in other establishments on Printer's Alley, they claim that he's in there moving things around and playing with the TV, playing with the radio. But Skull's Rainbow Room, they said they've seen pictures of men in photographs taken there in the doorway. There's just a lot of bars over Printer's Alley. They have stories of just things moving around, seeing women. One guy told me that somebody was bitten in the bar and like no one was around them. That was really strange to me.
Yeah, and Skull, that was his nickname, but he famously was murdered in Nashville, and that was a big story back then.
Yeah, he was actually on Hee Haw. He was kind of a regular. He's a bit background player, but he was friends with like Merle Haggard and all the older country artists back in the day, and they got him a gig on Hee Haw, and those little overalls they wore to kind of look like hillbillies, he'd wear them all the time. Well, he made a lot of money in that bar because he would have performers coming in, and it was the place to be in the 70s and 80s. Well, he was kind of flamboyant, and every morning he'd go out walking his poodles, and he would give money to homeless people. Well, word kind of got around in the homeless community that, hey, this guy Skull, he's got a lot of money. So he got robbed one day, and like they just beat the hell out of him, took all his money, stabbed him with like a Colt 45 bottle, and he died. But now they say they still see him in Printer's Alley and several of the clubs over there.
I know that Nashville, especially downtown area, has a huge Civil War history as well with Fort Negley and a few other spots. Did you get any stories of Civil War type soldiers and people from that era?
Well, the thing is, the Civil War really affected South Nashville. It didn't, they had Fort Negley, but they fought down there like Harding Place, Battery Lane, towards the Green Hills area. Downtown Nashville wasn't really affected by the war. The Capitol has some really cool stories. I started digging, and I actually contacted the librarian at the Capitol. He wasn't even aware of this. But after Fort Donelson, Fort Henry fell, the Army of Ohio marched into Nashville and pretty much got it no problem. And they used the Capitol as Fort Andrew Johnson, who was the military governor of Tennessee and eventually the vice president and president of the United States when Lincoln was assassinated. Well, Johnson, he was headquartered in the Capitol. And he kept hearing rumblings, hey, the rebels are coming to take the Capitol, because the Capitol's built on the largest hill in Nashville, or Middle Tennessee for that matter. So he kept hearing rumbles of a rebel attack, and he gave word to one of the sergeants there in the Army of Ohio. He said, look, you see the rebels, you blow the Capitol up. They had 60 kegs of gunpowder stored in the basement, and that officer was instructed to blow up the Capitol if the rebels tried to take that hill and take the Capitol. So that was really cool. But they say there was a Union soldier who got killed. There was a real bad storm a few months after the Federal Army seized Nashville, and he was stationed there in the Capitol. And when the storm hit, a door blew open, and his gun or his musket was propped up against the door. And when the wind blew the door, the musket hit the ground and discharged and shot that officer and killed him. So they said they've seen soldiers in there. I had a custodian tell me they've seen a well-dressed man walking through, which the stories with the Capitol is William Strickland, and also, oh Lord, he was the chairman of the Capitol Committee. They say that the two men who are buried in the walls of the Capitol, they bickered each other because they weren't very friendly in real life. William Strickland, the architect, he wanted just to make a big opulent Greek temple, but the people in the committee, they wanted to have like a lookout tower. So he didn't want to do it. There's a lot of pushback. Finally, they agreed to do it, but they still bickered about things. And both men are now buried in the walls. And they say they hear them bickering back and forth. And I found old newspaper articles where a guy who oversaw things in the Capitol, he was like a porter or a janitor, lived there during Reconstruction. Well, after the architect died, they put his body in the wall. The night they did that, he was staying there, and like whatever was there just ran him out. Said that he has no place to be in that place overnight, and things were thrown at him, and he would come back, and the bed he was sleeping on kept moving around, and he finally just got out of Dodge because something in that building didn't want him there.
Yeah, I always found it interesting that the architect was buried in the walls of the Capitol.
That was his grand creation. Like he had designed a lot of buildings in Philadelphia and Middle Tennessee, but the Capitol was like his magna opus, or however you say it. That was going to be his grand finale. And he died before it was completed. They were still working on it when he died, but they still buried him in the walls. His son is the one who wrapped things up. But still, I mean, it's a beautiful building. The architecture is nuts. But something that jumped out at me when I was working on this, I kept finding out that I guess maybe half a dozen people died just from falling off the portico at the Capitol. During Reconstruction, if you go there today, there's like a little rail or something to keep you from walking out. But there was one night when they had a Democratic convention and three local politicians went outside and just fell because there was no railway. It was just, they, in a brightly lit room, they walked outside at 10 o'clock at night and took one step too many and just fell. Well, one of the guys died. Like he fell too far and fell head first. And they said that somebody walked up on the scene and saw it. It was so gruesome, and started vomiting. So it's just, it's nuts to think that all these people just fell off a building and died, and it kind of just got swept under the rug. But after that politician died, they put a rail up. Once one of their own passed away, they're like, hey, there's a problem. You know, some kids had fallen off there. I think some African Americans had fallen off there. But once, you know, a politician and somebody they knew had died, they had to try to fix it, and they did.
Yeah. That's funny that it took that for them to finally fix it, and 12 people died just walking right off there. I'm sure that downtown Nashville, like we've talked about a bunch when you've been on the show about other cities like Murfreesboro and Franklin and Gallatin having fires. I'm sure Nashville was just the same.
Oh man, and that's one thing that, like, I was digging about. Like, I had to stop because I got so much information. There was one year during Reconstruction. It was 1869, maybe. I can't remember the year, but there was one year during Reconstruction. I counted 12 fires on 2nd Avenue, Market Street back then. It was known as Market Street before it became 2nd Avenue. But that one year alone, in 12 months, there were 12 different fires. Not all were huge. You know, some of them were. And the thing is, going back before then, even after that, the fire codes in Nashville, I think in 1850, they passed an ordinance saying that from that point forward, you couldn't build a solid wooden building. But everything built before that was a sitting duck, because there, you know, a stove or a candle, they're everywhere downtown. And fire was a huge problem. Multiple firefighters died downtown fighting fires. But 2nd Avenue, even Broadway, numerous fires, man, that just wiped out the entire blocks many, many times and killed a whole lot of people.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm sure like cholera and those type of epidemics, I'm sure took out a lot of people as well.
Yeah, cholera was rampant, man. It got people in Gallatin, Franklin, Murfreesboro. In Nashville, it got them too. James K. Polk, the former president of the United States. I mean, researching him, it's like Andrew Jackson kind of sucks the air out of the room when it comes to United States presidents in Tennessee. He was such a dominant guy, such a polarizing guy. But Polk, I mean, he was the father of westward expansion. The Oregon Territory, the fruits from the Mexican-American War. We got Texas, California. I mean, he got more. I think, I'm not sure if he got more land than Thomas Jefferson did with the Louisiana Purchase, but it's pretty darn close, if not more. James K. Polk was the thing. He kind of came in under the radar. When the Democrats ran a president that year, he won. They wanted to run Martin Van Buren again, but the party establishment is kind of against it, and they went to a vote 9 different times. Well, by the 9th time, Andrew Jackson's got his fingers in the pie, and he's like, "Look, James K. Polk, they called him Young Hickory. Jackson was Old Hickory, but before this convention, James K. Polk had lost the governor's race twice. He'd won it, then lost it twice, so they thought he was just done." Well, they go to this convention, and Jackson's like, "Yeah, Polk, he's a safe candidate." Well, on the 9th vote, he got it, but he had to promise he wouldn't run it for a second term. So he's kind of a safe choice, and he had Jackson's backing, but he was a very successful president. But when he died, he bought some land in Nashville over on Polk Avenue. It really belonged to Felix Grundy, a former senator. Well, he paid to have the house fixed up. Him and his wife, Sarah, moved there. Well, before they left Washington, the house wasn't ready, so they went to New Orleans. Well, while in New Orleans, Polk contracted cholera. When he made it to Nashville, it was too late. Nothing can be done. He died there in his brand new house. Well, since Polk had no children, like all his heirs just kept after it. But Polk named the state as his executor of his will. But all these people from, I guess, Maury County, Columbia, where Polk was from, were trying to claim his land. Eventually, Tennessee said, "Okay, you guys sell it and figure it out." So it's wild that the mansion or the property of a president was just done away with. Today, that would be a museum or a learning center, but it's gone. Now, on that property, it was an old library. Now it's an architectural office, and there's a hotel. And where Polk was buried in the front yard is now a pizza place. James K. Polk was reinterred 3 times. They wanted to move him to Columbia a few years ago, but the state kind of put the kibosh on that. But they say in that old library where the architectural office is now, they would hear people talking at night. And one of the senior members there, I think he ran a radio station out of the building, he would say, he's like, "Yeah, you could hear Polk and his wife talking at night." So it's really funny. I actually talk to people who work there now, and they're like, "Man, we're not here after dark." So it could happen. Maybe it doesn't. I don't really know. But the Polk story is just so sad that his mansion is just gone. And now it's just 2 old buildings, and Polk Avenue is still there. That was actually the driveway to his home, but now it cuts up there to Union, and it's gone.
Yeah, that's kind of how Nashville has been with the history. Is we don't care. We're gonna tear it down and build something else. Vanderbilt takes up a huge chunk of West End, the west side of downtown. Did you get any stories about the Vanderbilt campus? Some of those buildings are quite old.
I've got stuff, but I'm waiting for that for another book. I try to keep downtown Nashville just to, like, I guess, below West End, really kind of like Broadway, 2nd Avenue, Printers Alley, all the historic buildings there. Something that really I thought was just fascinating, the old Davidson County Jail, it's no longer there. There's like a historical marker. They were hanging people over there. There's one guy named George Pettway. His story was he lived in a boarding house in Nashville. It was a grocery store, but the owner rented out rooms to poor African Americans after the war. So George Pettway and several other men and a woman lived in those boarding houses. Well, the woman there had 2 suitors. One was a local blacksmith, and one was the guy down the street who would come call on her. Well, one night the caller came and her boyfriend was there, and they thought a fight was going to break out. So they called the police, or they got an officer nearby on patrol to come try to break it up. Well, when the officer got there, he found the owner of the boarding house dead. So they're like, "Oh, it's a big whodunit." Well, they bring all the boarders in, they question them, and they arrest the 3 of the men there. So George Pettway, one of the boarders, the youngest boarder actually, he testified that he was a lookout for the other 2, that they were going to rob him, take his money, and he was there to be a lookout and make noises if somebody came up. Well, he got tried. He got convicted of murder. Well, after they convicted him, the other 2, there were some hiccups in their trial, and it got pushed back. So George Pettway gets hanged there in the jail yard right there. I guess it's on 1st Avenue, Gay Street, whatever, that right there where the old jail was. And after he got hanged and executed, the other 2 men, they got off. even though one of the men admitted to doing it, the other clearly didn't have any part of it. So George Pettway really had no part in that murder. So after he was acquitted in the afterlife, or after his death, they started seeing him in the jail. And before he was hanged, they were trying to give him some clothes. And he kept telling the sheriff, I don't need no clothes. So when they saw him in the jail, he's walking around saying, I don't need no clothes. They call out to him, George, what are you doing? I don't need no clothes. So that was a really cool story that I found for the jail there. There's all kinds of stories. You go back in the old newspapers that they built a second building there inside the jail during the Civil War. It was used for hearings for the soldiers and just different kind of hearings. But they had 2 rooms in that one building. Well, one day they kept hearing all these loud noises. Everybody rushed into the room, and one of the ovens there was just beat to pieces. So a week or 2 later, they hear the same thing. The other stove in the other room is also beaten to pieces. And it's in there's no way anybody could have got in or out without being seen. So it was like a lead page in, I think, 1911 on the front page of the Tennessean, are there ghosts in the jail? So even back then, over 100 years ago, they're talking about the ghosts in the jail.
Yeah, the fire hall that is over there, I've heard stories from some medic buddies of mine about weird things happening in the fire hall that's over in that area. A lot of them don't like to be alone in there by themselves. When they're on 24-hour shifts or overnight shifts. They just feel like they're being watched. And they've even, a couple of them claim to see somebody walking around in the bedrooms area of the fire station. But yeah, so a lot of those buildings, just with the history, I guess.
Another old building is the Maxwell Hotel. It was like the first really big opulent hotel in Nashville, and it burned to the ground in the 1960s. But back in the day, it was where all the politicians stayed. The Maxwell House coffee originated there. But the story there was, and it's actually documented, it was used before the war, or I guess when the war first started, it was used as barracks for Confederate soldiers. Well, once the Union marched into town, it became a prison. So the hotel was still being constructed when the war started, so it was kind of unfinished. There were areas that were unsafe. So all these soldiers were kept prisoner upstairs and at the 5th floor. Well, one morning they called them all down for breakfast, and all these hungry soldiers who were prisoners bum rushed this hallway, and like the stairs in the hallway just collapsed. And it killed, I think, 13 or 14, I can't remember the exact number, soldiers. But after that, legend has it there was a Union soldier who was stationed there with his brother, and both of them started seeing the same woman. Well, after they found out, they made a pact, okay, we'll stop seeing her. Well, supposedly one of them went back on that, and when his brother came in a few nights later, they saw them in bed together. And they got into a fight, and he killed, one of the brothers died, and they threw him down the stairway or something, and the stairway collapsed, similar to the Confederate soldier. So either way, the story is there was a woman involved, and they say the woman roams the building. But I talked to a guy who still works there today, and he's telling me, yeah, the lady in black is real. Like, they've seen her in the lobby, they've seen her around, and it's just, there's a lot of history in that building, and a lot of bad things happen there too.
Yeah. What about 2nd Avenue? I used to go down there when I was younger and go to Graham Central Station and some of those places, and kind of heard rumblings about some of those clubs with people being there all night. Some of the staff would have weird happenings. But what kind of stories did you find out down 2nd Avenue? Yeah,
2nd Avenue is kind of weird. With that bombing a year or two ago, I started writing these books during pandemics, and it's just, God, it's hard. You have a pandemic and then a bombing, it's even harder. There are certain parts of 2nd Avenue I had to really fish for stories, like at Dick's Last Resort and those old warehouses down there. There's stories of chandeliers falling, and they've named the ghost Jill, and they've seen her moving around and playing tricks on people. The Coyote Ugly downstairs, that bar, it's underneath them. They say that some of the girls have been tapped and had their hair pulled. Coyote Ugly, they have very, very pretty women as bartenders. And just, I guess, the old sailors who haunt that building are just down there flirting with them. I don't really know.
Yeah, 2nd Avenue is one of the places that they haven't. I guess now that the bombing happened, they're probably going to tear half of it down and build new shit. But that's one of the places that still had a lot of the historic buildings and stuff. I've also heard rumblings about Acme Feed and Seed, which is now a bar restaurant.
Yeah, I couldn't get in there. With all the pandemic stuff, they had weird hours, and I think I heard something about them, but I couldn't confirm it, so I didn't put that one in the book. But it's weird, like Graham Central Station. That's where I went when I was I say kid, but I was younger. But it became the Johnny Cash Museum. And I had a guy send me a picture where he'd always go to, I think, the third floor, and he'd get these weird vibes, and he would take pictures. Well, one of them he sent me, he did like 2 or 3 pictures back to back to back. And one of the pictures, you can see like the image of like a kid over in the corner moving. It's really, really strange, but I put it in the book. But yeah, Johnny Cash, the boot store next door. There's all kinds of stories in that boot store. They say that they see things moving around, things jump off the shelves, hangers jump off the fixtures there. Yeah, all those. And it's the same story in every building. Every building has it, and it's like a big gag downtown. All the employees know about it. The Hard Rock Cafe, that's the gift shop there in front of the Hard Rock Cafe. The Schwab Building, that was it was like a saloon / hotel / brothel. And when sailors got done working on the river, or warehouse workers got done working, they go up to the saloon there and they go gamble. They could get a lady of the night. They could, go to sleep, get a beer, whatever they wanted to do. It was all right there on the river. So it's just, Nashville was a huge port there on the Cumberland River. If you want to move goods back in the 1800s, you went from Louisville to Nashville to New Orleans. The Cumberland River was the main thoroughfare. So like Thomas Ryman, who built the Ryman Auditorium, he made his money from running riverboats on the Cumberland. But yeah, right there on 2nd Avenue and Broadway, they walk up Broadway, like Merchants Hotel. They'd stay there, and all kinds of stories of merchants. They say that there's a Confederate soldier there, and they've actually found old love letters in the walls during renovations that tell the story about this soldier who, actually I think it's a Union soldier, because the girl, she was a Confederate sympathizer, but fell in love with him. And he got moved. I think he went to Chattanooga or Atlanta, and he started cheating on her, or she found out about it and just went south. But they say he came back, and now he's roaming the buildings, all kinds of stories. The management kind of frowns on it, but the associates will tell you they see things moving and things will fall, and just weird things like that happen.
Yeah. One of the places I've always wondered about on Broadway is the Ernest Tubb record shop.
It's wild. That was one, like, it should have been a slam dunk, but when I got there and started talking to the people, they were like, no, we've heard the stories, but we've never seen anything. I talked to 2 or 3 folks that work there, and they gave me the number for their corporate office, and like, it's nothing. And it's possible that maybe they don't want to talk about it and they want to keep it under wraps. But there's 4 small buildings right there together, and they're all built in the same year. Well, the other 3 buildings, I've got stories for days in there. The Mellow Mushroom, was it Crossroads, and there's one more. Yeah, all 4 have all kinds of stories where one guy told me that Crossroads bar, he went upstairs, saw a guy like he was putting stuff away, and he went up there to scare him, to play a joke. And like he ran up there, and like the guy just disappeared and was just gone. And he was perplexed as what he had just seen, because he knew he'd seen somebody up there, like he was putting things away, but there's nobody there. And it's all those old buildings here. Mellow Mushroom. Somebody told me that they were scared to go down in the basement alone, because the door, it's like the liquor cage where they kept the liquor, it would close by itself and lock people inside. And there's one building on 2nd Avenue. Where was it? I think it was B.B. King's. One person told me that worked there for a while. They instituted a policy like you don't go downstairs alone. You have to have somebody with you at all times to watch the door, because the door kept closing and locking on people. So right there on 2nd Avenue, all those buildings, they're warehouses. Before they were built there, I guess in 1860s, 1870s, 1880s, whenever it was. Before then, there were other wooden warehouses that burned down. But those old warehouses made of wood, they had slaves chained up in the bottom of them to unload the stuff that came off the boats. So there's some kind of mean spirits down there on Broadway or 2nd Avenue.
Yeah, and I'm sure you had all kind of nefarious stuff going on with bootleggers and prostitution and all that stuff as well.
Yeah, there's all kinds of houses of ill repute or ill fame. Printer's Alley, just Broadway. And they weren't really advertised as such. there were areas called Black Bottom and Hell's Half Acre where a lot of that stuff was rampant. Hell's Half Acre is another really cool spot, like Channel 5 News. I've done some media appearances for them to promote other books in the years past, and a lady kept telling me, you need to talk to so-and-so. She's here, and she swears up and down this place is haunted. So I talked to her, and sure enough, she's like, yeah, just weird things happen. I see shadows. The mics come off and on. I hear things in the mics when they should be turned off. Just weird things like that. And something else, there's a office building over there off James Robertson. And when I was doing this, I read that when it was being built, 2 people fell down the elevator shaft. So I'll go in there, and I was talking to a custodian. I was like, is this place haunted? He's like, man, how did you know? I said, well, I just kind of had an inkling. So he took me upstairs to the bathroom on the 15th floor where it was. He's like, every time I come up here, this door slams shut and this happens. I hear this, see this. But it's just really funny when you put 2 and 2 together like that.
Yeah. Yeah. And with such a storied history, like I wanted to ask about Ernest Tubb Record Shop, because just with the history of that place and the energy in there, you figured it would be. But like you said, maybe they're just keeping tight-lipped about it. But
yeah, and those 4 buildings there were hospitals for the Federal Army during the war. So people died there.
The majority of people that I talk to about hauntings and stuff, and even my own research and doing my own book, and I had a guest actually bring this to my attention, most hauntings occur in places where people slept or sleep. So you've got hospitals and hotels and those type of places is where a good majority of hauntings take place.
Well, I got a story about sleeping. In 1937, over at St. Mary's, it's the oldest Catholic church in Nashville. There's a priest named John Morgan, and he was sleeping in his quarters there in the church, and he heard a knock at his door. Like it startled him. He jumped out of bed and rushed to the door, but nobody was there. So he kind of walked around the church, and he made sure all the doors were locked, and he's trying to figure out what happened. So he went back to his room, smoked a cigarette, and he's trying to calm down. And he went back to sleep, and as soon as he had dozed off, he started hearing the knocking on the door again. But actually, the knocking wasn't coming from his door. It's coming from the headboard of his bed, just banging against the wall. So he was freaked out. He couldn't go back to sleep. And then when the sun came up and saw the priest stirring, he started talking to him, and none of them heard it. So oddly enough, 2 days later, he dropped dead of a heart attack there in the church.
Wow.
So it's kind of like, was it a warning, or it's really weird set of coincidences that happened right there before that guy died.
Yeah.
And of course, that hospital or the church is notoriously haunted.
Yeah. Yeah. What is that? What is the high school downtown there? Hume Fog?
Hume Fog. Yeah, that's another thing. It's hard to get into schools, all the regulations and then the pandemic stuff. I've heard things, and there's supposedly tunnels under Hume Fog too, but you can't get into schools right now, so I don't really try.
Yeah, it's just to be a high school, it's kind of an imposing building, a big stone building, kind of castle looking.
Yeah, and it's built before the war, so there's all kinds of stories there. Supposedly, someone told me they'd seen soldiers marching in the hall years and years ago.
I guess that would be another too, that not a lot of people there probably after school's out, after dark. So I'd be curious to hear, what some teachers maybe staying afterwards have experienced in there.
Something that I really enjoy doing is going back and finding these old buildings that have been torn down, old saloons, old hotels, and then going to what's currently there and talking to the people. There was a place called the Lynx Hotel. It's by the depot. It's on the northern part of downtown behind James Robertson. But Lynx Hotel, it was kind of a hip, happening place to be. You had a restaurant. It was right there by the railroad. A lot of people stayed there. So a lot of people got killed there too. So now today there's a whole bunch of probation officers and bail bondsmen who got offices there. So in there, and I was just talking to him, I was, hey, I've been researching this area, and this is a hotel. A lot of people died. And the lady's like, oh my God, that explains why this happens. And we see this, and we smelled cigarette smoke, and we've seen people walking around, and the TV comes on, and we hear noises. It's just, okay, well, that makes sense.
Yeah, the huge history in downtown Nashville. I can't wait to dive into the book. I didn't get a chance to read it before you came on today because you just put it out. But yeah, everybody go check out Southern Ghost Stories Downtown Nashville. And you're going to turn this into a series of a few different books, right? Because you said you're working on South Nashville, and I'm guessing you're going to have West Nashville and kind of.
Oh, God. Man, I've got a back burner a mile long of stuff I've been dabbling on for a while. Yeah, but it's going to be north, south, east, and west. I mean, south will be done by the end of the year, and just kind of however I pursue it, we'll see how the rest shake out.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate you coming on today and chatting about the new book. Everybody can go out and get it on Amazon Kindle, and they can get more information about you and your books, and you blog there as well at southernghoststories.com. And also join us over on the Tennessee Hauntings Facebook group. Alan puts all kind of awesome stuff up there. And I'm a moderator on there, but we only keep it to Tennessee stuff. We don't let people post other stuff. Some other groups, whatever, let people post whatever, but we try to be pretty strict about it. Also, you can join us on the American Hauntings Facebook group as well, and check out stories that mostly Alan posts, and I post memes and stuff. I try to post some stuff, but I've got a lot going on.
Yeah, well, let me ask you something. When's your book going to be ready?
My book, hopefully, I've been working on it, so I'm shooting for September.
Well, when you have it, you need to have the unofficial co-host interview you for your book.
Right. Yeah, Small Town Haunted Legends of Tennessee. I've been working on the YouTube channel as well, and so that first video about Carton Plantation will be up March 4th. People can go check that out and subscribe to my YouTube as well. And you and your podcast has kind of been put on the back burner, right? Southern Ghost Stories.
Yeah, my little boy broke his leg back last August, and it was so hard, and I kind of use extra time now just jump into books. I mean, I like to bring it back, but my little boy's 2, and there's just not a lot of free time. So the free time I do have, I kind of work on the books.
Yeah, but people can go check that out. It's anywhere you find podcasts. If you're listening to this podcast, you can find the Southern Ghost Stories.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks again, Alan, for coming on today. Everybody, thanks for listening. We will see you next time. Stay safe out there. Have a good day. Join us next time for a new episode of The Unseen Paranormal. Until then, head over to the Unseen Paranormal Lounge on Facebook for all the latest updates and discussions about the show. You can also find us on Instagram, Twitter, or at unseenparanormalpodcast.com. And please rate, review, share, and subscribe to help more people discover the show. The Unseen Paranormal Podcast is proud to be the ambassador for paranormal for Verbal.com. A big thank you to my friend Chris Lips for the awesome theme music. You can find more of his music on Apple, Amazon, or Spotify. And as always, thank you for listening. To the end of the line. Whoa. I can feel you as you pass the other side.